Hey guys, my name is David Tenorio. I'm an artist and teacher here in the Bay Area in California. I've been teaching art for about 15 years and I specialize in figure drawing and sketchbook techniques. So we're going to draw this head in profile. It's a little bit like maybe barely 3/4 because you can see the other eye, but definitely otherwise I'd call this a profile drawing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot the drawing on my page. This is where the ball and jaw really comes in handy because it gives me some idea of how big I want the head to be on the page. So there's the ball, where the figure's looking. Remember that this first line is basically a little bit, maybe less than half of the height of the ball. And then you can kind of duplicate that to do the jaw. So there's the ball, where the figure's looking, the jaw. One of the reasons I love the Delphonics pen is it's extremely soft. If you turn that tool sideways, if you hold it a lot higher, you can get some really fine lines, some very gentle texture, which is awesome because then it basically turns into a pencil. Ball and jaw. I might adjust this later, but right away I'd love to put a little bit of the neck and a little bit of the head back here. Now, even though we're doing these three heads and we call it the kind of like final stages, putting everything together, I can't stress that there's no pressure, meaning I don't want to feel any different about this session, this lesson, and these drawings than I have for all the other ones that were just quote unquote sketches or notes. And the reason being is because we're just applying everything that we've talked about and that we've learned. And so there's actually no hype, we're just running through all the steps and all the ideas that we've introduced to ourselves. And I really mean that because of the idea of emotion being so important in art. You want emotional attachment to your drawings and who you're drawing. And then just like an athlete, you also want to perform, potentially. So, you just want to come in here and get to work and realize, hey, this is just another drawing. No hype. I want to have the same chill, nice attitude I've had through all the lectures and notes, right? So here's that eye in profile. This is a really nice socket shape. It feels potentially to me like a bit more narrow, but you could still sketch it in there. Notice the angle of the bridge of the nose. You can use that to plot the eye a little bit. Notice how the eye that's closer to us is higher. It's showing the perspective of this figure. And speaking of, let's right away talk about that ear, where we said the ear is so important. So if we take a line and we draw it across the ear, it's below the nose, it's a little bit above the lips. So this is not too much perspective, but definitely a little bit. I would even tell you that a really professional tip, or sort of a professional mentality would be, there's always perspective. There's always something with the head being too, or not too much, but like tilted up or tilted down. Even if it's gentle or slight. As you get deeper into figure drawing, what you realize is there's just absolutely no such thing as straight up and down, straight side to side. It does not exist. There's always some kind of pitch. And if you don't see it, I mean this in an encouraging way, then you need to show that. Like you need to show that there's a little bit of interest to the head or a little bit of interest to the proportion of the head. So always be on the lookout for that perspective. Here's the mound for the mouth. Here's a little bit of the lips. Here's the bottom lip. Nice little shadow under the lips. And then I can tell down here I want to keep moving this chin just a little bit more, which even with ink, I feel pretty comfortable with that. Like I'm kind of duplicating the line or drawing lines over and over, but I feel fine with that because I can turn that into shadow. And then as I often cite, like at the end of the drawing, I feel like you genuinely are not going to really notice it. It just kind of gets buried in all of the other work. This is a great reference picture too because this is a shaved head, and so it starts with some nice, again, speaking of control, kind of like a controlled environment. We're not dealing with too much hair or anything, too many extra ideas. You can just focus on nice head, and I recommend people with a shaved head or shorter cropped hairstyle always include that in your reference pictures and your practice, because then you're getting to see that head shape. That, as I often say, potentially too much, that back of the head, right? That back of the head that goes so far. Speaking of, notice how I've taken the original ball and I'm pushing it farther and farther back. You could sketch this, of course, in pencil first. There's no law against that. By all means, definitely do that. And then if you sketch with ink, hold the tool high, tilt it kind of parallel or flat, and don't be afraid to just move your drawing, like move lines. And if you make extra lines, I give you permission, meaning I endorse it. If you want someone to support it or help you out and feeling better about that, I definitely will, because I'm into that. I like seeing process. One thing with ballpoint pen is you will notice sometimes you get a buildup on the tip. I'm a person in particular with ballpoint pen. I don't really care about that. Like, I usually don't feel that stressed or even take much notice, but I am right now. And you can take your pen and kind of rub it. Some people blot it on like a Kleenex or something. I might just have like a Post-it note, like I have just some paper on my desk. You can just go and like rub it off a little bit if you notice some of that excess. On a personal note, I usually crop this first part of the clip. Like you probably see this as a crop, and you have the picture on the left. But I want to point out that my hand is on the paper here on the left. Like my hand's kind of holding the paper. My fingers might be in the shot, and I've learned that that's a really interesting habit. I like to kind of like hold the paper down, or I think in a way I'm kind of like almost hunched over the drawing a little bit. I'm bringing that up because you want to be, in some cases, kind of conscious or aware of that. Like, what are you doing with your hands? Like, what's the rest of your, body kind of doing with the reactions to your drawing? Are you hunched over? Are you straight up? Not to like obsess about it, more just take notice of it. I've even just learned that I can't help it. Like I hold my paper down when I'm drawing. So I'm making this ear just a little bit taller. The ear is pretty close to the brow. It's like above the eye. So here again, I'm kind of growing it. And I have some extra lines, and like I said, I'll just sort of sharpen what is correct. And won't really take probably too much notice of those ideas. Sketching a little bit of the shadow. Okay, so I'm just about in a place where I feel not too bad about the setup of the head. From here, I'll begin to actually sketch and kind of render a little bit. So I want to find that heart of the nose. Really like that. I like this little like strip of shadow coming down. And then my form of shading is not complex. I mean, it's not really that deep or complicated. I just take the tool and kind of like hatching, I just gently wash it up and down. And I really like that verb wash, because I'm sort of applying like a field of shading. Here's the nostril. It is pretty dark, but again, I'm a big fan of avoiding like pure black. So darken it or make it stand out, but don't, in my opinion, don't get too aggressive with that dark. Notice that little round shadow around the nostril, kind of like the wing of it. I don't really outline a lot. I rather you think and even see my drawing and think of the term like trim. So I'm sort of like trimming or strengthening the line of this nose, but I'm definitely not doing this. I'm not taking the pen and just grinding it on there to outline it. I never would want to do that. So instead there's just a little bit of trim to kind of strengthen it. Notice that beautiful curve that goes into the eyebrow. That's going to happen with different skeletons, like different biology, different backgrounds. You'll see different rhythms for that nose. The eyes are really dark. I always say this with encouragement: don't lie. Meaning, like, don't potentially stick a lot of excess detail in there. If they're sort of dark and hooded and there's a lot of shadow in there, then just lay that in. Maybe give like a hint of a gap or less dark to show some life in there. But pay attention to the lighting, especially this lighting that, with the strong cast shadows that we see, we can guess is some pretty direct sunlight. It's actually why the front of his face doesn't have very much shadow. So as I mentioned, I might take one portrait at least and draw a little bit more in silence. Not to create like crickets, but I think a lot about how I'm talking. I'm kind of like stopping. I'm like pointing at things. I love that for your benefit, and I think to your benefit as well, you might enjoy seeing kind of like live, like what does it look like to just go into it, draw it. I'll still bring up some important points, but I'd like to kind of simulate like the real life idea. It's kind of the equivalent of scales in music, or sort of like practicing a section of music and then performing it. It'd be kind of interesting to see the performance. That way you can get a gauge for how it looks and how it feels. Here's a little bit of the lip. Remember, the lip line is very dark, but I would be careful of all black. An actual tip for that would be don't outline. Like I was saying, like, well then don't outline, don't trim, don't find yourself kind of like wiping the tool or the pen back and forth. Just add a little shade or a little tone in there, and that should create largely all you need. Anytime I dart to another section, like I just trim the eye up here a little bit, that's kind of proof of how my eyes are always trying to move around the page and move around the image. I gotta be honest, I think sometimes it can get me in a little bit of trouble. Like it might feel like unfocused, but it's a respect for me making sure I'm seeing everything working together, and then also just not trying to work all the time in like sections, as I call it. I don't really want this feeling of like, now it's the eyes, now it's the nose, now it's the ears. I think I said in another lecture that you teach it like that or you explain it like that, but I don't always think that's exactly what you should be doing. I think that can get a little bit stiff, and then a bigger concern might even be that you feel like done or finished with a section. And I think that section should be live, like ready to be changed all the way until you put the tool down, until the very end. Notice how I did the chin. I come up to the top of the head. I sort of go back and forth because I'm assessing and kind of like making sure. Here's like a little bit of that constellation idea where I even like skip. I'm kind of making sure that everything is looking okay overall. I'm making sure that I'm not like fully committing to one line or the other. And then I still have some room to move. I can kind of shift ideas a little bit. I like a little bit of this shadow under, or behind the ear, I should say. It kind of shows like the ears, of course, popping off the head, and then it also kind of like tucks the ear. It kind of shows a little bit of that skin that is slightly bunched up, like when your ear is connected to your head. The ear is a very complicated shape. We've talked about that. This is really a good time to talk about focal point. The focus of the drawing, in my opinion, should be the face, like the narrative of the facial features, the eyes, the nose, things like that. So then, in my opinion, like back off or lay off of the ear. The ear is very complex, and unless you're doing an ear study, or unless, again, by all means, make that your decision, like your choice of thing you really want to feature. Just blend these shadows and shapes together, and then don't make them as dark. Remember that you can create contrast and focus not just from light and dark, but also through attention. Give an area more attention, which I will in a minute to finish this up. Give another area less attention. So speaking of attention, I gotta be honest, that's my cat scratching on cardboard. I apologize for that. When you film in a home or an apartment, you can only control so much, so apologies for all that noise. This is the real world of recording, right? All kinds of things. And hey, maybe you experience that same thing for sure. Maybe you have people, there's my cat meowing. Maybe you have people, talking to you. Maybe you have you hear your kids or something, or your partner. In fact, in a funny way, let's pretend that's also the idea of when you're drawing live, like you're drawing in a setting like a bus or a park, coffee shop. You're going to have distractions. We're going to do a drawing that's a little bit more emphasizing the idea of a crowd, like kind of pretending, but I can tell you right now that one of the biggest distractions of drawing people is actually other people coming up to talk to you about your drawing, to tell you like, oh, hey, are you drawing? Or, oh, wow, that's cool. Like, are you an artist? And I genuinely love those moments. Like, I love people being interested. And then it's funny, it can be distracting, right? It can be distracting when people are talking to you and you're trying to draw and sketch and study. And deep down, you might even be studying, right? You're sort of saying like, hey, I'm out here drawing. I'm not really looking for a lot of discussion or attention. But nonetheless, it's really cool for people, of course, to approach you. But this is all to cover up the the ambient background noise, right? To make excuses for it. It's not always super quiet where you're drawing. But that's a good thing. Again, I think that's great practice if you like to draw out in the wild. And I've done it for many years. I don't really think a whole lot anymore about drawing outdoors, like as a sense of like attention or stress problems or anything. But I can definitely sympathize that it can be. And I even learned a lot from when I was younger and I would draw caricatures. I was actually doing that in high school. At a bookstore. I'd go every Friday and I would draw characters and make a little bit of money. And that was my first time having people watch me draw in public and talk to me and, sort of distract me or even like put some pressure on me where I felt like, oh, I really have to perform or make this look good. And so it's definitely a skill too. And you should try it. If you've never tried it, go out in public and draw. And it can be like the gym. Like there's kind of this myth that when you go to the gym, everyone's like looking at you, and the truth is they're not. They're just, everyone's focused on themselves. And same thing, you might go draw in a coffee shop and you might think, oh, everyone's like watching me or I'm so nervous. And it turns out like no one even notices. No one's even really looking at you, right? Do it. But it's a cool way to train to draw the head. And of course, drawing people live or in person is really great too. Okay, now speaking of, I'd love to keep these a little shorter in time. Like I'm challenging myself to kind of apply those quicker ideas. But as I mentioned too, like the teaching and the chatting will get you a little bit extra time. Now this is a shaved head. I do like that there's some sense of hairline. So it's not like this perfectly like skin texture. So remember the hair tips, which would be, you can hint at that thin hairline and focus on the edge. So focus a lot on like slightly carving or creating it through the edge shape. Don't worry about filling up the entire shape with marks or lines. And then especially back here, right? Focus on the outside. So texture is always on the ends. Right? On the end of something or the edge of something is where you're going to see a lot of texture. And then, especially with this one, because it is so closely cropped, I'd like to hint at it, but I don't want to do too much. And the most I'll do is towards a shadow area. Maybe I'll do a little bit of extra interior, just so I'm communicating, like, there is some stubble, right? Kind of the word, like close crop stubble idea. Okay, now this is where, in terms of a sketch, I feel close to being done. And I want to address focal point and focus. And so I usually come back and I give some extra treatment to what would actually be called the midtones, right? So kind of like these middle areas of light and dark. So if you see like a very gentle shadow of a turning form like here on the eyelid, now would be the time to sort of hint at that. I'm not making the eyes like one single shade. I'm sort of like on purpose organically putting different little marks in there to imply some information, because I can't see the eyes, but I also don't want it to look like black, like pure black. You can come back to the bridge of the nose and give a little bit of form. I put a little bit of this like hint of, it's really nice. It's like, oh, this, 5 o'clock shadow, almost idea, like a little bit of stubble. You can very gently treat that. And the point is I'm treating a lot of information here in the focal point. So on the left, I'm trying to treat a lot of this. Trim the profile, potentially, like trim that silhouette so it's nice and strong. Don't grind a long outline. Even if you end up outlining the entire edge, I think that's visually fine. Just don't think that way. Like, don't think of doing big outlines, but smaller little bursts of trimming it. This is the hero drawing, so we're actually going to call this, again, one of the longer sketches before we do the other two on this page, and we kind of intentionally make them a little bit smaller, and even potentially a little bit, not quicker in terms of care or respect, but a little bit quicker in terms of like application, so that this again is like the hero shape, the hero head. For me personally, last thing I do from a guy I love, Giovanni Civardi, Italian figure drawing artist, is I like a little bit of kind of animation. And I know I'm putting some heads over here, so I'm going to be kind of chill. Maybe I'll add a little bit later. I'll just kind of start with just a little bit of that energy. Now there's fabric. There's even like this ripple in the fabric that's kind of cool. There's shadows in the fabric. But remember, for me personally, focal point is what matters. It matters to keep the attention up here in the front of the face. And so for the rest of the face, I can make information and respect it. I respect that there's shadow and information, but it's all about here in these features. Put that finishing touch on there, and then, keep working. Be careful to overwork, right? But also what I'm saying is, just because you dot an I or cross a T doesn't mean that you're satisfied. You can check one more time and say, I need a little bit of tone here and there. That's what I meant about like pieces and parts. You're not always done. You're not always like completed. You haven't completed the eye part, and now you never get to work on the eyes again. Definitely put in those last little adjustments as you see fit. And the good news would be don't do it just to add information from the photo. For me, I'd say do it to enhance that focal point, to like really sell that focal point idea and that attention.